right. First off, that was the wrong intro. But hello, welcome to the Comic Watchers. Uh, I'm Chad. I'm flying solo tonight because Matt, he's having computer issues, but that's okay because I am joined by Che Grayson. They are the writer behind the new IDW Original Anthology series, Dark Spaces, Good Deeds. Uh, Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Chad.
So, before we get into talk about the book, tell me a little bit about yourself, about maybe, your history with comic books. Do you remember maybe the first one that you read or the first
Yeah.
one that kind of hooked you?
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit of a late bloomer. I was always into kind of growing up science fiction, fantasy, and particularly horror. So I knew I was a big nerd, and I read a lot, but I didn't have like a local comic book shop or anything. So um, growing up, I wasn't, actually connected to the medium of comics. I just kind of watched the newest X-Men at the time in the early 2000s, the newest Spider-Man and Iron Man, and I loved that. But it wasn't until I uh, went to film school at NYU in the early 2010s and found myself kind of every time trying to produce shorts. It's very expensive. You're funding them yourself. You're having to get a whole crew and being very frustrated with how do I continue to hone my skills in visual storytelling if I have to wait every year to make a short. And at the
Hmm.
time, I was really good friends with someone who was in another program at NYU who was an artist. And I said, well, I'm really into magical realism, really into just genre work in general. Would it be weird if we tried to just kind of see what comics have in stores? I can write scripts. You're an artist to Forbidden Planet, which at the time was my local comic book shop because my school is in Union Square, New York. And so the first recommendations I actually got were Sweet Tooth and Why the Last Man.
Yep.
And I was instantly hooked. I particularly just loved uh, the non-cape storytelling methods of storytelling. And so I just quickly devoured everything from Image, everything from Vertigo, and then kickstarted my first comic. And so we tried our hand at comic writing. We did an issue for something called Rigamo about a girl whose tears bring people back to life, but every time she uses the power, she ages. And so that was my first attempt at writing a comic. And I remember, you know, in film school, it was like the less dialogue, the better, just everything visual. And then I got the first review for my first issue, and someone was like, there's not much dialogue in this. And I was like, duly noted. I was learning how kind of the
Yeah.
different mediums kind of lended themselves to each other and how sometimes they didn't, sometimes they worked against me. And from there, I started going to cons. I went to my local cons, and then I would go to New York Comic Con. And next thing you know, I gave my comic to Valentine Delandra, who was at the time, uh, you know, one of the most well-known artists, still is, doing Bitch Planet. And so the first published thing I ever did was Bitch Planet triple feature. And so from there, I've written for DC Comics, um, and yeah, now I'm here with IDW, and I'm very excited.
Yeah, you're working with a guy who's going places in the industry, Scott Snyder.
Yes, for sure. Who's been places and going to more places. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure he has a lot more places to go. So, kind of, um, how did get, hooked up with Scott Snyder to work on, this anthology series that, he's kind of curating?
Yeah. I met Scott over the pandemic actually, and we started just he was looking like, how do I connect to more comics people when we're, in quarantine? And my friend at the time, Vida Ayala, was like, you should meet Che and my best friends Che and Regine Sawyer. So next thing you know, we're Zooming with Scott once a week, just talking about anything and everything, sharing our work. He knew how much I loved horror. I knew how much he did at the time. Before I had met him, I had read Witches. And so that was kind of surreal to now be getting to know someone who is obviously so prolific. And so I was working on another horror graphic novel idea that ended up going to Abrams. But he knew about that idea, and he tried to kind of link me up with, at the time, Mark Doyle and Maggie at Black Label. And so I was kind of pitching to them. They knew I was into horror at Black Label. And then when they went to IDW, they were like, listen, we're at IDW now. Scott's with us now. And we're doing something called Dark Spaces. And so they already knew that I was into horror. And they were like, do you have any ideas? And I was like, do I? And so I had a kernel of an idea that I pitched to Scott. And it wasn't until I pitched it that I could fully bake it with kind of his, we kind of just ripped off each other. And that's when the kind of foggy idea became crystal clear. Pitched it to Mark and he loved it. And from there, then got greenlit and now it's going to be in stores in May. So I'm really hyped.
So that's a great segue into, talking more about Dark Spaces, Good Deeds. What's it about? Who are the main who are the main characters, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So Good Deeds is a kind of a supernatural psychological mystery about a down and out journalist from Atlanta who gets a fluff piece to cover the 350th anniversary of St. Augustine, which is known as the oldest city in the United States, the longest existing city in the United States. And it's a big tourist attraction. It exists. I don't know if you've ever been, but it's in Florida, and you can go in there.
I try to avoid Florida.
Lore. Yeah, that's fair. The last time, it's been a while since I've been there, so probably most people will just get their dose of Florida through my books. But I went there actually in the midst of a Disney trip, and it was really, really interesting. And I'm really interested. My family's from the South. I'm really interested in kind of Southern Gothic, that kind of backdrop. And I was like, well, St. Augustine is known for, like someone coming in search for the fountain of youth, a Spaniard coming in search of the fountain of youth. But like, what really happened and what's the difference between history and lore? So essentially, our journalist goes down. Her name is Jean McKnight. She has a deep, she has kind of a checkered past and a big secret that we'll be able to follow throughout the series and kind of uncover. But she goes there just to do a fluff piece on the Founders Day celebration. Oh, isn't it so nice? It's such an old, cute town, and ends up stumbling into a murder mystery. And so she ends up pairing with another outsider who's the new girl, Cheyenne, whose mom and her just moved and opened up a diner in St. Augustine. And the two of them kind of team up, an unlikely friendship. They team up together to find out, who needs a fluff piece when we can figure out what dark things are, amidst in the shadows in this town. And so that's kind of how the premise is set up. And there's payoff with, they certainly get the answers that they're looking for.
Now, is this a limited series or kind of an ongoing? Because I've in preparation for the interview, I read the first issue, and it was good, but it seems like you're setting up a lot.
Yes, it's 6 issues, and it's a limited series.
Okay.
So everything will be wrapped up in its 6th issue. Yep.
And so let's talk a little bit about the rest of the creative team. How did you did IDW or Scott hook you up with Kelsey Ramsey?
Ramsey. Kelsey Ramsey, who's absolutely incredible. Her work just blows me away every time she sends in pages. We were connected. Basically, Maggie, the editor on the book, had a short list of artists she loves, and she was like, okay, here are 5 people I want you to look at, but honestly, Kelsey is by far my favorite. So I looked at all the work, and Kelsey was also my favorite. So I was like, well, that's easy. Let's hope she says yes. And she did. And, I kind of met her. Uh, and it was great because she's like young and newer in the industry. And she's British. So I realized, oh, the way I write my scripts are going to have to be a little bit more detailed because she needs that cultural context for American things as someone who's British born. So I thought that was really interesting. But I think she's brought a lot of life and fire to this kind of slightly fictional St. Augustine version of St. Augustine. And I love her character work particularly. And so, yeah, she's been an absolute pleasure to work with.
And who are the who are the others, like the colorist, and because those the colors also, along with the art and the writing, really help set the tone for the book.
Yeah, so Rhonda, am I saying her name right? Pattison is the colorist, and she was also the colorist on Wildfire. And I knew particularly how striking her colors worked with Hayden's work in Wildfire. And so, again, our editor, who's just a rock star, was like, I really think Rhonda's right for this too. And so, yeah, we saw the first pages of her coloring, and they were absolutely amazing. I mean, you've seen the first issue, so it's so atmospheric and so bold. And so I just love, we kind of just all give each other free reign to do kind of what we want to do. So there isn't much like, you have to do it this way. It's kind of like, let's see what they bring back. And then we just kind of all have fun.
And has Scott just kind of, yeah, given you kind of an open sandbox to play in?
For sure, definitely. I think outside of just, helping me with the original idea and pitching it and kind of working with me on, as the issues go on and thinking about the fuller arc of the story, it's been completely just open arms, which I love because it means I get to do things the way I want to. I mean, mine is more supernatural and his, Wildfire. Sorry, uh, my dog is in desperate need of attention. Yeah, but his is a more kind of grounded, taut thriller, and I love ghosts and creatures of the forest. So, I got to take my swing in that direction, and he was
Mm-hmm.
more than open to that, which is great.
So how is it? How have you found it? Um, doing film, and then also comics. Is it a different process for your writing? Is it do you take? I'm sure you take elements from your filmmaking, and try to translate it to the page.
Yeah, I think what's really great is, as someone who can't draw, um, because of my screenwriting experience, I'm still able to kind of communicate visual, kind of the visual aspect of what I want in a way that I found artists really respond to. So usually when I'm writing a script for a comic, I try to actually make it feel as close to a screenplay as possible. Like I will give them the panels, they can mess around with it if they want, but I will give them their panels, give them the dialogue, actually tell them how many panels are in it, like what to expect. And I think that kind of, I've gotten feedback in the past with that format that literally would be an email like, oh my God, thank you so much. It makes things so much easier for me, like a artist doesn't want to go back and think about how many dialogue bubbles are going to be on the page and worry about that. They want kind of the opportunity to do their work. I'm coming. I forget if I actually just take her, she'll be. So yeah, and I think really thinking about what I love about how comics have made me a better kind of screenwriter is that things are so much more economical. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to think about what you want to say, and when you want to say it in comics, and that has really helped me make my scripts when I have to submit them. When I'm in a writer's room and I'm on a TV show, it has to be tight and it has to feel good. And I think that's been great. And then the thing that I love most about comics is the emphasis on voice. Like as someone who's written Harley Quinn and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern, like I've had to inhabit different voices. And so the most fun I have is actually trying to give characters distinct voices that that you love and that you feel give kind of spice to, Matt Fraction is like one of the greatest writers of, when you think about dialogue, and Brian K. Vaughan, like kind of want your characters to feel like who you're just following, as opposed to the art is so good, people just go for the art. I want people to come for the writing too. But I think, comic writing has made me a better filmmaker, and I think film has made me definitely better in comics, and they work really nicely hand in hand.
And you kind of mentioned a couple of writers there, but are there any, writers that, and kind of you tend to look toward, besides
Mm.
those two? Are there other, writers that may perhaps influence your work or just your overall approach to comics?
Yeah, one of the definitely two of the most pivotal series I've read were Infidel and Sweet Tooth, and I think I am completely, and as I mentioned earlier, it was one of the Sweet Tooth was one of the first things that I read. But when I think of filmmakers I love, it's like Guillermo del Toro. I love that kind of fairy tale, dark, twisted fantasy way of you have this narration and it feels like a dark sort of heartbreaking tale, but there's heart in it. And with Infidel, it was one of the first things I read where I'm like, this is scary. Like it's so hard to find a comic that can scare you, and I want that so bad for Good Deeds, for people to actually be like, oh, okay, I don't want to look too close. And I really love Junji Ito. He's definitely a big inspiration for me too. And then definitely Brian K. Vaughan. And I don't know if I mentioned Kelly Sue DeConnick, but she's like queen to me. She has been a big champion for me since bringing me onto the triple feature and helping me getting into DC and stuff like that.
So are there, is there a character in the new book that maybe, you, projected some of yourself into, or maybe a character that,
Mm.
you found kind of difficult to write at first, but as, you kind of got into it, you were able to find their voice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Jean, I love writing Jean because she represents the part of my 20s, the version of myself that I no longer am a little bit, like kind of caution to the wind, very ambitious, but kind of at what cost, um, and a little too, almost like a little too close to the danger. Like she's a high risk kind of person, and she's confident, but as get through her you get through the experience and just see how kind of vulnerable she is and how much she's yet to face. And I think that's been very cathartic to me as someone who went to film school at 22, and I was with people who were, 27, 40, and they knew exactly who they were and what they wanted. But I had the passion and the drive too. And I think with Jean, she has done all to make some bad decisions, and it's kind of gotten too close to the sun. And so this is kind of a period where she gets to be humble and see her work in a different light. Before it used to be, I want to be the youngest Pulitzer Prize winner, and now it's like I want to actually think about the responsibility that comes with journalism and with writing and with sharing stories, the weight of that. And so the way she arcs is a way that I hope I continue to grow as a storyteller. So it's been really great to inhabit Jean, for sure.
So you've kind of mentioned that you've done your creator own work. Then you've, played in the DC universe. Is there, I'm sure there's a different, as a writer, there's a different, because when you're writing, the established characters, there's certain guidelines you have to, kind of stick with. And, I read your urban legends
Mm.
contributions. Um, was there, any of those characters that you wrote that, kind of stuck out for you or you'd like to explore more?
Yeah, I mean, I that's a great question. And I started off, I never thought I'd be allowed to even write Batman or to pitch new characters who live and breathe in Gotham City. And the editor at the time, David Wag, I always mess up his name, but Dave, love Dave, Waglowitz, and he was just like, I want you to do this. And I was like, but I can't write Batman. And he's like, but you can. And he's like, and I also want you to think of your character. And I had this idea. We when me and him would work together, we would think about what are the themes that we feel like are salient right now? What do we want to say? And
Hmm.
then we would decide on thematically what we want to do. And then kind of Ghost came to be. Ghost was like this kind of cool anarchist, kind of in the vein of like if Catwoman was a little more, was much younger and kind of a punk anarchist. Um, and so creating Ghost is still one of the highlights of my career because Dave just was like, give birth to her and let her shine, and kind of both creating a new character and giving her a voice was really fun. But then also trying to be a believable Batman that works in the dynamic of a snot nosed kind of but strong kid was really gratifying and actually really easy for me. It was really easy for me. And for some reason, writing in DC has been easier for me than even trying to hone my own voice, my original work, because when I'm in the Gotham playground, I trust that these characters are established. I trust that the creators that came before me made all the right decisions. So when I'm just Harley, I'm like, okay, I'm also originally from Brooklyn. Like, how crazy do I want to go? Like, I just all I have to do is turn on my ADHD brain for Harley, and it's a grand old time, you know. And so it's almost easier for me to write, you know, Harley or Wonder Woman with kind of the validation and the check marks already existing. But when it's with creating, you know, G McKnight or Cheyenne Wright for Good Deeds, it's like, are they interesting enough? Is this exactly what I'm
Hmm.
going for? You know, they don't have a pre-established life. You know, for me, Batman has existed before and will exist after my story. And so when I'm doing something wholly original, I have to, at least in my mind, understand that there's a before and an after, or else the characters won't feel as good and as strong as audiences who pay money will expect when reading, when picking up, um, you know, a book. So yeah, that's my long answer.
No, that's great. Are there, after, your experience in the Batman, side of the DC universe, are there any other, any characters, in the DC universe or even Marvel that, you would like to take have your shot at to kind of
Yeah,
put your stamp on?
yeah. My dream on the Marvel front, because I had an opportunity at one point and it became defunct, but I was originally at IDW, I was doing something with Ironheart, and that was really fun too. Again, I just think it's so easy to inhabit characters that already have that lightning in a bottle.
Hmm.
But when I think about Marvel, it's like X-Men all day, every day. And then for DC, my obsession is just Arkham Asylum. Every villain, every character that's walked through Arkham Asylum, its origin story, all of that, that and Catwoman is like the dream of dreams
Hmm.
for me. But if I could
So,
do like a horror, you know, like a David
yeah.
Finch, I mean, that exists already. It's called The Batman by Matt Reeves. But if I could do also just, you know, on a dark, stormy night, something happens, something's a brew in Arkham Asylum, I would do that for free.
No. Well, there's definitely a lot of material in Arkham Asylum to work with.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so looking over your bio, I mean, besides the comic book and the filmmaking, you're a TED. Uh, you've done. I take it you've done a TED talk or two.
Yeah.
uh, Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So um I it was great because I think it was the summer, it was basically 2015, 2016. A new residency program had been announced at TED because they had built an HQ. And so they like, we do the yearly TED speaker conference, but now that we have a headquarters, what if we brought residents in who could do whatever work is completely interdisciplinary, bring their big ideas, and then they can do a talk at the HQ. So I had heard about it on a completely different job. I was with an actress, and she was like, "My husband works at TED, and there's this program." And I said, "Really? Very interesting." And at the time, I had just like found out that I would be doing a short in Bitch Planet. So everything was kind of coalescing around this time. And so I applied to the program, and it was this amazing 9 month program where I was doing working on my own individual project and then writing a TED talk, which is called The Superhero We Need. Essentially, the kind of thesis of my talk was that, I start off my first line as Harry Potter taught me right from wrong, which doesn't really age well, seeing as J.K. Rowling doesn't seem to know right from wrong. But but it was about how I, deeply believe that superheroes and fictional characters can inform young people's, morality and ethics and understanding in the world in a very positive way, and how it did that for me. And so, yeah, I cannot believe that I was able to memorize a 5 minute talk and do it fairly well. And so it's so great that that's something I could say I did. And there were cohorts after me, and it built a great community. And some of my best friends to this day I met there. So
So, with once the good deeds wraps up, is if it's well received, are there more stories you'd like to tell, kind of in that universe, or using I don't know if any of the characters survive, so
yeah, yeah, can't say anything on that.
yeah.
But I would love to. I think I'm realizing now, because I'm also writing another horror graphic novel of mine for Abrams, is that my horror definitely exists in the same universe,
Hmm.
which uh, I'd like to keep that way. And so, um, definitely where this is going toward the end, it's definitely the end of a chapter, um, but a new chapter could certainly start in the same world. I'll say that without giving any
Hmm.
spoilers. And I'd love to. I'd love to kind of continue to explore. And I can't say, I'm being kind of vague, because I think
Oh
what
no,
Jean
yeah.
and Cheyenne end up uncovering kind of lends itself to you don't really know what the story is until you uncover the mystery. But I think that for sure I would love for there to be more in the realm, especially with the kind of world building, the creatures, that stuff that exists
Hmm.
certainly exists outside of, more than outside of just the confines of this 6 issue arc.
Now with writing, being a fan of horror and writing horror, were there any like tropes that you kind of from tropes from horror stories that you wanted to avoid, or kind of
That's a
maybe
great question.
say this is how it's usually handled. I want to turn it on its side and do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. One thing I always try to avoid is it was all in their head. Like that, it was all a dream. It was all in their head. Jean is just
So,
crazy.
so,
Like
so the last page
I'll
of
just nip that in the bud now and say you're
last
that
page
don't
of
work with
issue 6 is not them stepping out of the shower.
me. Yeah. So that's what I try to avoid. And something that I love, which I often bring up, is what I love about Haunting of Hill House or even The Sixth Sense, where not only are there proper horror elements that give me the serotonin I need as a horror fan, but it's made even more scary because these characters feel real and the supernatural forces represent a more grounded, real trauma and emotion that the characters are going through.
Mm-hmm.
So, so for Haunting of Hill House, for the ghosts to represent, the way the characters say, the metaphor of the house, the metaphor of the ghost, that like the house is kind of like the world digesting you and eating you up. And it's like, that's terrifying because you're like, yeah, it's 2023 and it feels like the Twilight Zone. I feel like I can't escape. I feel like I'm being slowly digested and and kind of drained by social media and by politics and everything like that.
Every
Um,
day.
right. And so what I'm trying to do with Good Deeds is have that balance where I'm just like, Kelsey, I'm writing this. This is just as creepy as possible. This is melting off. This is exposed rib. Like having that, but also Jean dealing with which we discover is like a dependency on alcohol. And so I think kind of the things you do to quiet the demons, and then also getting to just see real demons, are my favorite kind of thing, and kind of what I'm going for with Good Deeds.
Um, how do you feel you've grown as a writer? From your, I guess, mainly since we're talking about comics, but um, yeah, from your and I would have the title of the stuff, but my computer laptop just died, so I
No
can't
problem.
see anything. Um, but how have you grown from like your first work to where you
Mm.
are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, starting from Rigamo and Bitch Planet till now, it's Good Deeds is my first like long form story where I'll have to sustain story and plot and characters and track characters arcing over 6 issues instead of 10 pages or 20 pages. And so that's been the biggest thing for me is getting bigger opportunities, but therefore also bigger responsibilities. And so
Hmm.
really how I've grown as a writer is that um, I'm learning, I'm becoming better at doing longer form stuff. It's like at first I could hit 8 pages out of the park, and now I have to hit 130 out of the park. And so
Hmm.
I've over the years, both in TV animation, which is what my other full time job, to now this latest series, it's about not only trying to hit those pages, but really giving audiences a bang for their buck. And I like to fit as much story as possible. Like I don't want someone to read it, go, oh, that was cool. That was a really quick read. And yeah, the art was really good. Like what I want is for them to kind of have to go back and start putting pieces of the puzzle together and say, oh, when they said that, that meant that now, but reading back, it means something completely different. And so just the almost the pressure of taking that on is something that I feel like I could only do now and not
Hmm.
necessarily 5 years ago, to be perfectly honest. And I think it's hard for us writers to admit that because we want to be able to write our way out of anything and everything, which respect. But also just being so I think the only reason why I've even gotten better is that I've allowed the notes to inform my writing. So over the years, the editors I've worked with if they say something's not working, if they say this is off or move direction, I don't see myself as a pushover in the sense because I will usually take 95% of notes I get.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I wouldn't have, I'd still be the same writer 5 years from now if I didn't actually take people's notes and take people's criticism, to be honest.
Hmm.
Um,
And I would assume you also work with your artist, when you want them to draw like I don't know, or a pile of rubble, and they're like, I don't want to draw rubble.
yep.
um,
And I'm just like,
as
okay, as long as you have something better.
yeah, big rocks. So, are there any? I mean, I'm sure you have definitely have a wish list of uh, other creators you do like. But are there like any artists that you would particularly like to collaborate with in the future, or on a dream project?
That's a great question. I think I've one of my friends who her name is Naomi Frankies, and we got to do a short horror together on James Tynion's Razor Blades horror magazine, and it's called Midnight Swim, and it's some of the best fun I've had. And we've always wanted to work with each other, and
Hmm.
we kind of came up together a little bit. Like as I was trying to get my thing in, she was getting swept up by people to as an artist, and so we've never been able to fully get on a project together. So Naomi is forever my dream collaborator, and one day we will make that happen. She's really really talented. And as for a dream project, I know I'm blanking on it now, and gonna forget it. But honestly, I spend every night watching Scooby Doo. So if anyone wants to hire me to do a Scooby Doo spin-off that's not Velma, oh, then I'd be all for that.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I mean, it was fun, but it was
It was
different.
different. I'll say, there we go, there we go.
So, have had a chance or to go to a convention now as a creator, and how has that experience been when you're just going as a fan?
That's a great question. Because I remember when I first went into New York Comic Con for the first time, and I was like, the feeling I had was like, I'm home. And so it went from me cosplaying with my friends, doing cosplay meetups, like dressing like, I'm from Thymyscira and doing casual cosplays and maybe getting on panels that were kind of geek community centered panels. So now I go for work. Now I just get a pro badge. I'm in, I'm out. I see my friends. We have like drinks or something or coffee later. Um, and so I kind of miss those days when I would wait in line to see a panel.
Hmm.
And now I'm a little burnt. I've had 3 years to have a break, and I just recently came back from Emerald City, which is my favorite Comic Con.
Hmm.
And so I think my favorite thing about Comic Cons now is walking through Artist Alley and giving the artists all my money. That's kind of my thing now. Like, how can I act like I went in as a fan, and now it's just like seeing all the friends I love and giving all the talented people my money. So that's been the main shift.
So who should people be looking out for, creator wise, for people that you may who are in the artist alley, trying to make you know
Mm,
get their stuff to people. Or
yeah.
who's the next big person, so I can start getting the early stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Who did I recently met someone at the con who was absolutely amazing. I believe, what was her last name? Yeah. So I met a dope artist at Emerald City. His name was Natalie Anderson, and she has these really cool Rizzo prints. And I bought one of a Kiki Delivery Service one, but she had this like very kind of middle grade adventure fantasy book that I saw that was sold out when I tried to get it. But I instantly looked at her stuff, and because I work in animation, I was like, "Your work has animation. All of like that book needs to be a show already." And she was like, "Actually, yeah, it was supposed to be." And then Cartoon Network kind of imploded. So like, oh no. But yeah, Natalie Anderson was we just like completely hit it off and had so much in common. We were talking about, trying to get into animation and the guild and all of that stuff. But it's always really nice. I think another one that I love, who I just buy all of her posters, is Tracy Ching, and she has like some of the dopest. I have her Attack the Block poster, but she just does some of the coolest. I think her work is kind of like vector work. But I collect a lot of movie posters. You can see I have my the Batman and Crimson Peak in the corner, and then you
Mhm.
can't see, but there's like a Psycho one and a Godfather one. So yeah, I'm really into film posters.
So you're getting back into the con scene as a professional. And you said you just got back from Emerald City. Are you planning on doing any other ones this year? Or
Yeah, I definitely always try to make it out to San Diego Comic Con. And then C2E2 has never worked out, but it's another one that I'm interested in. And like SPX, I've always been interested in as well. And I just have never had a chance. So as things feel more manageable, hopefully I'll have some reasons to do more traveling in different parts. And I also love Rose City Comic Con too. That kind of feels like home for me as well, as a con
Mhm.
that's big enough to get something out of it, but small enough where it feels intimate. Those are my favorite cons.
Um, is there anything else that you maybe wanted to mention about the book? I mean, what is there anything that besides a great story, do you want readers to take away from the book?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that I want people to just be reminded, yeah, comics can be really scary, just because the sound effects you can't hear, you can't get those jump scares in that way, that there are real ways in comics that a story can really get under your skin, resonate with you, and make you want to go back and read it again. A lot of times we might read something and never read it again, and so I kind of just uh, as a horror fan, my some of my favorites are the ones where you think one thing is happening until the very end, and then the big reveal, similar to Sixth Sense, so that when you watch the Sixth Sense again, you're seeing it in a completely different way, but you still love it, even
Hmm.
though you like understanding the twist doesn't then make the story valueless. I think those are the best plot twists, the
Hmm.
best endings is the ones where yes, everything is completely broken open and bare to see, but now I want to read it again to say, oh, Che was telling me all along. Um,
Hmm.
and so and in terms of the way I want it to end, I want people to think like, what would they do, and yeah, just have fun reading it and not be totally confused and confounded and annoyed, and just be happy and thrilled that they were in this world for however many hours, hour and a half. Yeah,
Now I know it's probably, I mean, being the comic book writer and filmmaker, would you, if given the opportunity, would you want to kind of make a make a live version of Good Deeds, or maybe you know create
absolutely.
create that universe where you could tell those types of stories and and take those stories from the comic book format and translate them into the a real life, kind of film or series.
That's a great question. I mean, honestly, every time I go into a room with an exec at a studio, they love to hear that. Oh, you're building your own IP. Oh, this is going to be out. Please send it to me. And I'm so glad that I chose comics for the love of it. I mean, it's very convenient now that there's
Hmm.
a demand for it, but when I was doing comics at NYU, everyone else was still kind of chasing the perfect Oscar movie or the perfect kind of Sundance darling, and I was in the corner doing weird magical realism superhero stuff. And now it's the norm. It's actually like the only way that you might even be able to get a little bit of traction in a very honestly hard industry. I feel like comics is a lot easier for me to break into, a lot easier, a, a, a lot more. I felt more like more like a meritocracy. Like I got to meet the biggest people and connect with people, human to human in a much easier way than in kind of Hollywood.
Hmm.
Um, but my absolute dream is that, I'm creating these stories in comics because I love them, but every time I am developing a story, I can see them in both mediums. I think it's kind of like someone who's bilingual now. I love adaptation, specifically kind of seeing Sweet Tooth get and Sandman and all of those get adapted. I have huge respect for adaptation. When it comes to comics, I think it's about time. It never gets old. It's giving comic creators more power because a lot of them are getting into the room. Like one of the things I'm most excited about is seeing Something is Killing the Children at Netflix. Like I want that so bad. And so more of that, more because comics we don't do it for the money. So I think letting not only comic adaptations happen in film and TV, but bringing the creators into the mix. The Last of Us has not just, shiny Chernobyl writer, but also the creator of The Last of Us. And I think that means a it means so much and Scott Snyder doing Witches at Amazon, it means so much to see that the studios know enough to bring the creators into the fold and to treat that pipeline from comics to TV or film in a more respectful way than I think has been done in the past, where they just like, oh, we got it, and let's just make it whatever we want, and it's not going to be completely, no one's going to be able to recognize it. Instead, I think there's a lot of intentionality happening right now, and I'd love to get a piece of that pie. So,
Who wouldn't?
right?
um, and I guess one last question. What are you reading yourself that you
Mm,
think that people may you know should check out, or you I'm sure you read a lot of stuff that inspires you in your work, but you know what
yeah.
what do you I mean what are you reading now and you're really enjoying just the heck out of?
Yeah. I'm actually really into the shift that's happening right now where kind of Y2K and 2000s and early chat rooms and stuff like that are being are the new retro. Because I'm a 90s baby, so that's the era I grew up in. And an example, I
I
read
feel old now.
I've read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We've Last Spoken by Eric LaRocca, and it's a selection of short horror stories.
Mhm.
Um, and the first one, I think the one that went viral, that kind of prompted him to make the short story collection anyway, is like this really dark, sapphic horror about these two women who kind of fall in love over email and then AOL. And I'm like, I haven't had this kind of aesthetic in so long. It's so creepy. I remember when the internet was scarier than it is now, when so much more taboo in a way. And so yeah, when I was a kid, I was like, I would never. My friends had so many online friends, and I was like, I'll never have online friends. That's who knows who they are. And I love tech horror. Like I love The Ring and Pulse and films that deal with like early technology. Um, so I really loved that book, and it was an easy read. Um, and so definitely, and he has a couple of other Eric LaRocca. He has a couple of other books too that I'm definitely going to read more of. Um, and I'm trying to think. Sometimes I go, especially when I'm writing comics, I end up going a long time without reading much. But
Mhm.
honestly, anything by James Tynion, I think is an absolute hit, and so that's kind of what comes to mind at the moment.
Well, so, as we wrap up, kind of give us a, a last kind of pitch for the book,
Mm-hmm.
and also where, people can follow you on social media. I mean, your name is right there, but
Yeah,
where else
no
can we
problem.
find you?
Yeah, so last pitch for the book. So if you like Southern Gothic horror, um, swampy, wet, gators, um, kind of backdrop with a nice, with your kind of anti-hero journalist going to uncover a mystery um, that becomes bigger than she could ever imagine. And creepy deer in the forest. Like my personality is just weird deer amongst the trees. Then this is your book. Um, and yeah, you can find me on. I don't do much Twitter, but Twitter and Instagram on Che in Wonderland. And that's me.
All right. Well, I want to thank you again for chatting with me this evening. The book comes out in May from IDW. It is, let's see, Dark Spaces, Good Deeds, or Good Deeds, Dark Spaces.
The
I
the
get them.
former,
I'm
the
getting
former.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely let your local comic book shop know that you're interested in the book. In order for from them, as Matt, my other co-host would tell you, be nice to each other and do a little something to make the world better. Have a good evening.
Same to you, Chad. Thanks.